Hi, and welcome to this video on anchoring self-confidence. In this video presentation, we're going to be covering why we're learning about anchoring, what's anchoring all about, how you actually do it, as well as I'm going to challenge you to go out and practice creating an anchor for yourself and then noticing what happens when you do that. All right, let's get started. I want to first start by telling you one of the most sort of memorable experiences I had with anchoring before I actually knew what anchoring was. So I was living in Tokyo, Japan, and Tokyo is actually a very safe place. So I was coming home from work one night and I had gotten off the bus and was taking the normal route that I normally take down the side street, not the main street, but the side street. It's much quieter. It was dark when I was going back, but there's some street lights and stuff. It's not really well lit, but it was okay. And I had taken that route hundreds of times in the time that I had lived in Tokyo. So I'm headed home and I have, bags in both my hands, and I'm just kind of walking along thinking really nothing about, anything suspicious or strange or anything like that. I'm just thinking about my day. And from behind me, I hear a distinctive sound of a bicycle. So that sound of like the chain running through its gears and running through the cycle that it does. That's what I heard. And I thought nothing of it at the time because, my boyfriend who I was living with at the apartment that I was walking to had ridden his bicycle many times to work, and maybe he had done that day as well, and maybe he was just behind me. And anyway, I was in Tokyo, it really didn't matter. So I continued to walk along, and the bicycle sound got closer and closer. Again, really not thinking anything of it. Well, that was until there was a man in front of me, and he was ripping off my clothes. And it was at that point in time that I really realized what fear does to someone, because I was frozen. Not a word could come out of my mouth. I was shaking, and they literally felt like there was nothing that I could do. And from somewhere deep down inside of me came this scream. And it wasn't like one of those screams you see on a horror movie where it's like this perfect scream. It wasn't like that. It was a ugly, guttural, nasty scream. And it was the scream of, I guess, like the inside of me saying, I don't want this to happen. And when that scream came out, that was the only thing that stopped my would-be rapist at that point in time. And so he got back onto his bike and started fleeing, and I continued to scream and ran down the street after him. And at that point in time, I was so angry about the violation. And it really struck me really hard. And the next day I went into my general manager at the hotel that I was working at and requested for an immediate transfer. I refused to live in a place where I felt fearful of my life. So they did. They transferred me to Singapore. And I was working in a hotel in Singapore, and life was good. Singapore is really safe. And I'm walking down the street again. And I heard that sound. That sound of that chain. And at that moment in time, I could feel my entire body almost freeze once again, just because of the sound of a chain. And the guy who was coming up behind me had obviously realized that he startled me and apologized for doing so. And I said, no, it's actually not you, because it wasn't him. It was that sound of that chain. My body had been anchored by that sound of that chain to expect a stimulus of something that was actually quite horrific. So that's why I want to talk to you about anchors, because they're amazingly powerful things. And we really need to know about them in our lives because they're set oftentimes unconsciously. And what we want to be able to do is to create more positive ones in our life. So let's look a little bit more carefully at anchors. All right, so anchors can have quite a number of characteristics. So one of them is the fact that they can be created at any time, and they are timeless. So unless you have had an experience of being an NLP practitioner and being able to learn how to collapse anchors, then your anchor will be continuous through your life, because most of the time we are unaware that they actually exist. So that particular anchor of that bicycle, I knew that I had a reaction to that sound of that bicycle chain, but I didn't know how to get rid of that reaction until I actually took NLP. So that was really quite important. So most of the time our anchors are negative because we have peak negative emotional states, and something happens within that emotional state that gets us anchored to it. So I'll give you another example of a negative anchor, and this one's from my sister. And she had been complaining to me about the relationship with her husband, and one of the things that she said to me was, every time she opens the door to her house and she looks at her husband, she gets upset. So I wanted to understand a little bit more about this. And she had just started a new job, and the job was going really well. But actually what I wanted to know about was what happened in the old job before she switched. And I said, so tell me about your day when you were coming home. And she said that she would leave the office every day with all of this sort of negative feeling about her work and something that happened at work. And she would mull over that particular situation of the event of that particular day, or something that was an ongoing problem at work. And she would mull over that for the entire ride home until she got to her front door, where she was at the peak state of being so angry about whatever happened at work. And she would open the door, and the first thing she would see is her husband. Now, she repeated this many days in a row for many months. So when she was at her new job, she would come home and she wasn't angry at all, but she had the same experience as opening the door to her house and seeing her husband's face, and she instantaneously got upset. Now, it was just an anchor that she set accidentally for herself. Again, most of the time, they're unconscious acts that we do, and they can be set at any time. So for hers, it was a peak emotional state that was repeated over many, many, many months. And so that triggered her to have this stimulus response, this conditioned response for her husband. So it is rare that we have positive anchors that are unconscious. And the reason for this is pretty simple. It is very rare nowadays that we allow ourselves to create a positive emotional state that gets that level of positivity. So if you think about, the times that we're angry or we're fearful or any kind of sadness or guilt or anything like that, where we have these really deep emotional negative states, how often do you feel a positive state that is just as strong but high, a high positive state? So most of us don't allow us to experience amazing joy or amazing confidence or a peak state of love. And the reason for that is because of the fact that we have a tendency to want to tone down our positiveness, because the world is made up of so much negative stuff that we kind of look like the tall poppy if we act out too much. And we're kind of afraid that we're going to get our heads chopped off if we're too happy or we're too joyous or we're too confident. We're afraid that something's going to happen to us. So we rarely create positive anchors because of this kind of thing. So now that you know that, we're going to teach you how to create a positive anchor, because of course you're not necessarily doing them unconsciously like we set negative anchors unconsciously. All right, so let's take a look more about anchors. Most of you probably don't know the gentleman on the in the photograph here. That's Ivan Pavlov. He was a physiologist who did an experiment with dogs. And so the Pavlov dog experiment is quite well known in psychology, and as well as in physical science, that where Ivan Pavlov originally came from. So one of the things that was quite interesting about the Pavlov experiment and the Pavlov dog experiment was that he was trying to show something that he called conditional response. So what he would do is he would have a dog and he would have a bowl of food. And every time that the dog ate the food, he would ring a bell. And so over and over and over, it was the dog, the food, the bell. The dog, the food, the bell. The dog, the food, the bell. So what he was able to do is remove the food from the equation and have the dog and ring the bell, and the dog would salivate. He had a conditioned response, knowing that the bell meant that there was food coming or that the food was there. So the conditioned response was a physiological response of the dog, that it wasn't the food providing the physiological response. It was the bell that was associated with the food, a conditioned response. So what Pavlov was able to do was to show this because of repetition. And as I explained before, in anchors, when we're setting our own anchors, anchors occur most often for us unconsciously when there's a peak state, an overriding stimulus response. So there's a stimulus that creates a feeling. All right. So for me, it was that stimulus was that bicycle sound that created a fear response. Or for my sister, the stimulus of seeing her husband's face caused anger. That response. So when we're setting anchors, we can use this idea that Pavlov has of repetition, and we can also use this idea of intensity of feeling state. So an anchor is set when you have that peak state, when there's intensity of that feeling, when it's unique, and the anchor is unique, and it is repeatable, and you can do that anchor over and over and over again. So those are the four qualities of a really good anchor, or the characteristics that allow an anchor to actually occur. Now, I want you to think of some things in your life that you already have anchors to. For example, think about the flag of your country and what feelings a flag brings up. So most people would say it's like the feeling of pride, or for some people, I guess, the feeling of disgust or whatever. But that flag is a symbol that represents, a visual symbol that represents some sort of feeling for a lot of people. Sunny days, another visual anchor that we have. So when we see a sunny day, we're more likely to be happy than if we see a rainy day. A smile. So when we see a smile, it's an anchor for certain feelings. And then if you think about brands, so Louis Vuitton or Lexus or Ferrari or whatever it is, a brand can also have a stimulus response in us to have a certain feeling that goes along with that brand. So if you think about your auditory sense, music is often a anchor for people. So I have a particular song, The Boys of Summer, that anchors me back to a very specific point in my time of my life where I was 16 years old. I was laying on a beach and I was surrounded by gorgeous guys. And I can feel that in that particular state in me every time I hear that song. It brings me just right back to the time when I was 16 years old. And music has the power to do that as an anchor. And your name actually is also an auditory anchor. So when somebody says your name, it's an automatic kind of thing. And especially if you hear your name and somebody's not talking to you, you automatically have a response to that, even if it's not you that somebody's talking to. So that's another kind of auditory anchor. And then there's other anchors that people have, like helicopters or airplanes. So I live in Singapore, and when I hear a jet over my house, I have this sort of sense of patriotism, strangely enough, because I've lived in Singapore for over 18 years. And that jet normally means that the practice for the Singapore National Day has already started. And so that jet going over, I kind of feel like, ooh, it's almost National Day, and I get excited about that. So that sound of that jet has a stimulus response, a feeling response inside me. So a kinesthetic anchor might be a hot bath. So when you get into a hot bath, it's like, oh, that feels so good. And you have this almost instantaneous calming relaxation feeling just because you're getting into a hot bath. Now, for my niece, it's things like fuzzy sweaters. She can put on a fuzzy sweater and she gets this, like cuddly, like she's hugging a stuffed animal, but kind of wearing it at the same time. It's that kind of cuddly feeling that she gets when she has a fuzzy sweater on. Another one might be a hug. So a kinesthetic hug from somebody else stimulates feelings inside. All right. And one other one that I wanted to point out, a sense that actually has quite oftentimes really powerful anchoring for people is our olfactory sense, our sense of smell. So when we go in, for some people, when they go into hospitals, the smell of a hospital can bring fear to some people, can bring anger to some people. I don't know a lot of people who have a smell sense to hospitals that's a good one. So I can't give an example of that. But a good one is actually the smell of food, like freshly baked bread or your favorite dish or something like that. That smell that comes from a kitchen and sometimes even a restaurant, that smell is something that you have a feeling sense for because of what you're smelling. For me, I think it's probably bread. I love the smell of bread and hate the smell of coffee, but that's another one. Coffee brings a sense of feeling to a lot of people in the world who drink coffee. Now, for me, it just completely repels me. I hate the smell of coffee. But for some people, it's like they can just smell coffee and feel awake. It works, right? And for other people, it's things like perfume. The smell of a certain perfume. I have my husband wear a particular cologne because it has a very, very distinctive feeling for me for that particular cologne. And you could probably guess what that feeling is. Anyway, all right. So we've talked about these four areas or these four characteristics of anchors, about their intensity, the peak, the uniqueness, and the repeatability of the particular anchor. So I want to talk to you about something that's really important, actually, is how do you get to a peak state if you're just creating the anchor yourself? So it's this little thing in NLP called submodalities. And a submodality is basically our sort of ingredients or qualities, like the quantity or quality of an ingredient that goes into something, right? So we have our visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory senses. So when we're trying to be able to have an internal state, such as confidence or calmness or something like that, it helps if we can adjust the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, internal representations that we have of that particular state. It helps if we can turn them up. So to be able to get to a peak state, we're going to be using these submodalities. So they're the qualities of our internal representations, basically the visualizations and feelings and sounds that we hear inside our head. And when we ask someone to remember a time. Remember a time when you felt really confident, or remember a time when you felt really calm. When you go back and you remember that time, and you might close your eyes to do so, you're going to come up with an internal representation of a time that you felt really confident or really calm. So that internal representation has all sorts of qualities to it. So it might be black and white, or it might be color. It might be like near to you, or it might be really far away. It might be sort of in the center of the screen of your mind, or it might be in the upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right of your mind, of that sort of picture, that frame in your mind. And so there's some of these representations that are drivers, these submodalities that are drivers. And those are the ones that we kind of want to play with. So when we get that internal representation, we want to make it bright. So that's the intensity of the picture that we're getting in our mind when we think about that time. We want to make it as bright as we possibly can, but not too bright that it's going to be, it's too much. But we want to make it bright. We want to make it in the center of the sort of the screen of our minds. And we want to make it close enough to us that we feel really good about it. Not too close that it's kind of overpowering, but just close enough that it feels really nice to us. And we also want to make sure that it's in color rather than in black and white. Now, if there is sound associated to your internal representation, then we want to play with the sound so it is really amplified to us, and that it's really good and it makes us feel even more confident or more calm or more whatever the state is. And we want to be able to do that so with the auditory sense as well as the visual sense, as well as the kinesthetic sense. So if there's feelings that are associated with that confident feeling, we want to amplify that confident feeling. So if we feel that confident feeling like in our stomach or in our heart or in our arms or wherever it is, wherever it lives, we want to amplify it so that it feels even more strong or even more powerful than what it would have been in the original experience we were remembering. So as you're going to be the explorer of creating an anchor for yourself, then you want to make sure that you understand that it's your responsibility, because there's going to be nobody else there, to be in charge of these submodalities. This internal representation in your mind, you want to be able to be in charge of making it as good as you possibly can get it, so that you can create that really high peak state, so that when you set your anchor, it's set at the highest possible peak state that you can do. Now, if you've ever been to an Anthony Robbins program, you know how Anthony Robbins does this, because he has you actually turn up the dial. So you imagine that if there's a brightness dial, you turn it up. If there's an auditory dial, you turn it up. If there's a kinesthetic dial, you turn it up. You are going to turn up all the feelings past 10 to 11 and 12 and 15 and 100, and you're going to do that. Now, when you're in a room full of 1,000 or 10,000 people with Anthony Robbins, it's really easy to do because the energy level is so fantastic. But when you're by yourself, it's kind of up to you to do it yourself. So you got to give up the, looking foolish or whatever it is. You got to give up on all of that. Do it by yourself and just have fun with it. And when you're in a confident state, just go for like big confidence, really big confidence before you set that anchor. You want to have it at that peak state. It's really important. All right, let's talk about actually doing this anchor stuff and how to create an anchor and what the process is that you're going to be going through. All right, so when you're going to be setting your anchor, you're going to be kind of acting like this guy on the screen here. So when you're going to step into the role of being fully confident, and if you're choosing another feeling state to be in, do whatever feeling state that you're wanting to do. I'm just going to talk about confidence at this stage. So when you get into that sort of stepping into that place, which you're actually physically going to step into that place, just like the guy on the screen. You want to 100% believe what you're doing, all right? So the practice is all you, and you need to be able to be the person in charge of all of the little steps that we're going to talk about. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to recreate the intensity of the feelings. So remember when I said, remember a time when you were fully confident, you're going to remember that time and you're going to recreate those feelings, and you're going to step into front of you where you're going to recreate it, and then you're going to amplify it, right? So now, before you get too far in this, you want to make sure that you have an anchor that you want to do, and that the anchor is unique and repeatable. Now, in something like this, I would personally choose to do some kind of kinesthetic anchor. So that means like a pumped fist, or a motion that you do, or pressing on some area of your body where you normally don't press, that it's okay to press when you need to press it to do your anchor wherever you're going to be. So like if you're going to go and stand on stage in front of an audience and you want to set your anchor while you're on stage, so you have that full confidence, going like this on stage is probably not a good idea. You don't want to, it's unique and it's repeatable, but might not be a great idea. So choose an anchor, a way of kinesthetically anchoring yourself to be able to do confidence. So for me, confidence is this. It's this motion. This is the one I did when I was at Anthony Robbins with all of those big giant people. And so I use this one all the time. So that's my one. You can choose any kind of one. You can press on a certain area, a knuckle or something like that. You can do a fist thing. You can put your hands down. You could pop up. You could, all sorts of things that you can do. Just choose your anchor and make sure it's repeatable and make sure it's unique. Okay, that's a really good point. So when you step in, you're going to get that feeling back, that intensity of that. Remember a time when you were fully confident. Get that intensity going. Use your submodalities. Amplify it. Set your anchor and step out again. So you're going to step out because you want to do what we call break state. And breaking state means is that you're kind of like shaking off what you just did, and you're thinking about something else. You're thinking about like what you're going to do for the weekend, or what you did last weekend, or what you're going to have for dinner, because you want to stop what you were doing, do something else, and then be able to come back. So the next time that you're doing it, it's fresh, and you're not trying to do all of the repetitions in a row. Okay, so we go out, we kind of step out, we break state, we kind of shake our body a little bit, and then we're gonna be ready for the next time. And again, the next time we step in, we get back to that feeling of confidence, remembering that feeling really well, amplifying it as much as we possibly can till it's at its peak state, hitting our anchor, and then immediately walking back out again. And then again, breaking state. So you want to repeat that process 3 times. And that's going to give you that set for that anchor. Now, the best way to test an anchor, of course, is to do that thing that you just did, that anchor that you just set, and see if you get those feelings of confidence back. Now, remember Pavlov. So Pavlov used repetition to get the conditional response. And we're using stimulus, a peak stimulus, to be able to get a conditioned response. But repetition helps as well. So don't let your repetition of your anchor stop here. You gotta use an anchor, because if you don't use it, it's gonna rust. And there's nothing worse than a rusty anchor at the bottom of the ocean. It won't hold a ship at all. So you got to use the anchor, and more repetition you have, the more it sticks. And so as you go along through life, if you want it to be there all of the time, then repeat it as much as you possibly can. All right, so there is a handout that is here that guides you through the process of setting an anchor. Now, this handout is made for people who are going to be working together with other people. So what you want to do is you want to read through it, and you're just focusing on the blue highlighted bits, because that is basically what you're going to be saying to yourself as you create this particular anchor for yourself. So it gives you a guideline so that you can have a piece of paper guideline to be able to create an anchor, which also means that you can do other things besides confidence if you want to set other anchors. Now, I won't get into collapsing anchors or chaining anchors, but there's all sorts of things that we use and we have in our NLP toolbox that we can do with anchors, which is quite fun. So I highly recommend getting into an NLP class so you can learn that kind of stuff. It's really fun to chain anchors and use auditory anchors and all sorts of fun stuff like that. Anyway, all right, so this week, your challenge, of course, is to use your anchor. And next week, to create another anchor. So what I want you to focus on, though, is just noticing. So notice how easy it is to do your anchor. Notice how the feelings come back. Notice how creating another anchor, it might be even in a similar anchor that you're going to do, that you can actually highlight the emotion. So for example, if there's something besides confidence that you want in this one anchor, then stack it on top of that anchor. That's another kind of cool NLP trick, is you stack more feelings on top of that anchor to make it even stronger, because then you have this amazing set of emotional stimulus or emotional response that you get from this one anchor. So, and that is basically it for this video on anchoring. So you have your worksheet, you've got your challenge to use your anchor this week and to create another anchor, and your assignment to notice whatever you get out of the particular anchoring exercise that you do. Excellent. So this is the end of the video for anchoring, and I am Lindley, helping to build a better you.